Hi, this is Karie Bible, tour guide at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and I'm back for week 2 of my Hollywood Forever tour talk. I want to thank everybody for tuning in last week. Honestly, I was really shocked by the reaction and how many people watched it, so thank you. That was really nice. I did get a lot of people emailing me questions, so I wanted to answer some of those questions at the top of the hour here. So let's see, question 1. When am I starting the tour again? Well, that's a very good question. The world is kind of changing like every minute right now. And I know California is starting slowly to roll out a plan to reopen. But I know 2 people who've had COVID, so I'm a little leery. I think I'm going to wait a couple more weeks, maybe till mid-May. And then at that time, I will make a decision about when to start resuming again and how to start resuming again, because it might look a little different than it did before. So stay tuned to this page or to my website, cemeterytour.com. Okay, second question. Have I had any ghost stories or paranormal encounters at Hollywood Forever? The answer is no. I'm very skeptical, and honestly, I have been there 18 years, over 18 years now. I've done shoots that have taken me to the cemetery in the middle of the night, early morning, all different hours. I've never had a single paranormal encounter of any kind. And my theory is that if ghosts do exist, they're not going to come running when we call them, like dogs. And I also think they would come at the most shocking, inopportune, and unexpected times. And they probably would go to a place that had to do more with their life as opposed to where they are laid to rest. And as it stands, my cemetery tour that I do is already 2.5 hours long, and it's chock full of fascinating history. So for my purposes and for the work I do, I really don't touch the ghost thing. I just don't feel like I've had any experience with it at the cemetery or that it's really relevant to what I do. So sorry if I've disappointed anybody, but that's my honest answer. But I do understand the fascination. I have taken ghost tours in London and on different vacations, so I understand that it's interesting stuff. If you want to learn more, though, about the ghost angle, I highly recommend looking up my friend Scott Michaels, who runs Dearly Departed Tours, or my friend Craig Owens. He does tours also, and he wrote this fascinating book, Haunted by History. Excuse me. And it's a really fascinating deep dive into historic locations, the people who inhabited them, and the reports of paranormal incidents. So I highly recommend Craig's tours and the book Haunted by History. Okay. Next question. Have I ever planned to write a book about the cemetery? The answer to that is no. I've co-authored 2 other film history related books, but there is one book that's already been done about the cemetery by a very lovely couple, E.J. Stevens and Kim Stevens. It's an Arcadia book. It's mostly photos. It's very well done. And then Alan Ellenberger. If you don't know about him, I'm going to post a link to this group after my lecture is over, my talk rather. Alan is the official historian of record at Hollywood Forever. He is amazing. I have learned a ton from him. He's written books on Miriam Hawkins, on Mae Murray, Anita Page, full-length massive biographies. And he is currently doing a comprehensive legacy, or a comprehensive history rather, of Hollywood Forever. I am supposed to be interviewed for that book, and I do have a bunch of archival photos I will contribute to the book. So Alan is awesome. I'll post a link to his blog, and you will definitely want to look him up. You can just get lost in what he writes, and he's excellent. So he's the man for the job, and I'm really looking forward to what he does. Okay. Updates on Close Up. Yes, I know you're all wanting updates on my baby. So, excuse me, I'm having really bad allergy issues this morning. I'm not sick. It's like here to here. But anyway, Close Up is doing really, really well. I got to visit the cemetery yesterday for a little walk, and I got to pet him and feed him, and he followed me around for a while. He is flourishing. He's doing really well. I can't remember if I mentioned it last week or not, but the cat caretaker at the cemetery mentioned that she named him Mr. Growly. And I said, well, why Mr. Growly? And she said, well, whenever she goes to feed him multiple times a week at the cemetery, he growls very loudly to keep all the other cats away from stealing his food. And so she named him Mr. Growly. And I told her why I named him Close Up. And I said, why don't we combine the names and he'll be Close Up Growly, which sounds very Downton Abbey. And considering his regal attitude, I think that's a very fitting name for Close Up. But as I said, don't worry about him. He's well fed, he's well taken care of, and he is so, so happy at the cemetery. Also, it is springtime, and since we haven't had a lot of people on the grounds, the ducks, geese, and swans are kind of free to roam a lot more, and we have some baby geese at the cemetery now. They're so cute and fuzzy, and I will also post some pictures of them too. Oh yeah, and some people have asked me why I'm not on Twitter and Instagram doing these as well. Well, technology can be a bit of a struggle for me at times, and I felt maybe doing one platform at a time is the way to go. But what I'm thinking of doing is taking all of my talks and putting them up on a YouTube page. So if you miss them due to time zones or whatever, then you can later on watch them. So when I get the YouTube page set up, hopefully in the next few days, I'll post a link to this tour group and you can see it there. All right, now on to business, on to our star of the week. If last week it subverted your expectations by talking about Carl Dane, this week I'm going to do something that you probably are expecting me to do, and that's talk about Rudolph Valentino. He's one of my favorites. Valentino came to America. He was born in Castellaneta, Italy in 1895. And he was 18 years old. He told his family that Italy was too small for him. So he'd set sail for America. He landed on the shores of New York, and like a lot of immigrants, he faced a very difficult struggle. He didn't have money. He didn't know anybody. He didn't really have anything. English was his second language. And he found work eventually as a taxi dancer, which basically means ladies with leisure in nightclubs would pay him for a dance. Now, that may sound kind of funny to people today, but 100+ years ago, the world was quite different, and it was kind of considered a bit risque, earning him nicknames like Gigolo or Cabaret Parasite. But Valentino would not be deterred. He found himself in Hollywood in the middle of the burgeoning film industry. Now, unfortunately, at that time, they really liked to stereotype people. And if you looked foreign or ethnic, oftentimes they would be cast as the villain, the criminal, the lousy boyfriend, some sort of a negative stereotype. It's racist and ridiculous, but unfortunately, it's the way it was at that time. And given Valentino's looks, he was not going to pass for Kansas City. I mean, he looks Italian. So he was cast in some of those types of roles. In 1919, he was in a movie called Eyes of Youth. I've seen it. And Valentino's only in like a third of the movie, but he jumps off the screen. And when you see this film, if you see it, you'll see that he is something special. And it was apparent to all. Well, June Mathis, who was a great screenwriter at the time, she saw this performance and insisted Valentino get the lead in her upcoming World War I epic, Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Valentino was a working actor, but Horsemen would take him to a whole different level. In this film, he plays a young man whose life is forever changed by World War I. He romances a woman. He does a tango dance sequence. It's by far my absolute favorite Valentino movie, and this movie was catapulting him on the A-list. If that movie helped to make him a star, his next movie, The Sheik, made him an icon for the ages. In The Sheik, he played an Arab sheik in a tormented romance, and women around the world went crazy for Valentino. I think there's a lot of reasons for this. First off, he's really good looking. Secondly, he's a great actor. But thirdly, I think he was something different. Because before Valentino, most of the male stars were the clean-cut, all-American male. Valentino was not that. He was sensual, exotic, dangerous, unapologetic. He was Italian. And I don't think American women had ever seen anything like this before, and they liked what they saw. Now, even as a superstar, Valentino would still be playing the exotic. You wouldn't see him playing Joe Bob, the guy who runs the grocery store. That was not going to happen. He played roles like a Spanish bullfighter, a French aristocrat, an Arab sheik, and a Russian bandit. His films typically had lavish period piece sets and costumes, and always a torrid romance in the script. Unfortunately, his life off-screen was a different story. It almost always is in these cases. His first marriage ended in divorce, and sadly, his second one would end that way as well. And the final year of Valentino's life was a very difficult time. He was battling a painful ulcer. He was going through his second divorce, and he'd been attacked in the press. A Chicago newspaper ran an editorial that called Valentino a powder puff. Now, you couldn't ultimately call someone gay in the print media of the 1920s. That would have been taboo. But calling a man a powder puff was a not so subtle way of calling him gay. And Valentino was very angry about it, even challenged the man to a public boxing match. Valentino waited in a Chicago ring ready to fight, but the writer of the editorial failed to appear. So Valentino went on to New York City, where he was promoting The Son of the Sheik, his sequel to The Sheik, when he fell ill of a perforated ulcer, and he died at age 31 years old. Now, there had been celebrity deaths before Valentino, but there had never been one on the level of Valentino. Over 10,000 people lined the streets of New York to see his body lying in state. A riot broke out, the police were called in, and it was chaos. They brought his body by train from New York to Los Angeles, and Italian immigrants would gather at the train stations around America to watch the train pass through. And if you think about it, when a star dies, it's not just the loss of their life or their future creative output, but I think what touches people is the profound nature of what that star meant to them and to their lives. For example, I think with Valentino, he represented passion and love and excitement to a lot of women who maybe didn't have that. And also to a lot of immigrants around America, I think he was a symbol of hope. If you think about it, he landed on our shores as an 18-year-old kid with nothing. And he died, one of the most beloved and celebrated figures in the world. And a few months back, before the pandemic, I had a lady take my tour, and she confirmed this for me. Her great-grandparents had stood at the train station. They were Italian. They wanted to see the train car come through the station. So it's not a stretch to think those people could have been thinking, look, if Valentino can make it in America, then we're going to be okay too. So I think he symbolized hope for a lot of immigrants across the nation. Well, when they got him back to Hollywood, they discovered he'd been going broke. How can a star go broke, we might ask ourselves? Evidently, it is not hard to do. Stars had a tendency to spend money very lavishly on houses, furs, cars, boats, trips, you name it. And they didn't think about the future. And also, in all fairness, they did not know sound was coming. They certainly did not know the Great Depression was coming. And these things would wipe out even stars who saved their money. So in other words, this is not nearly as unusual as it may sound. So when they got back to Los Angeles, they figured out Valentino had no money. So the question became, what do we do? Well, June Mathis stepped in, the great screenwriter, and she said that she had some family crypts at what was then Hollywood Memorial Park, now Hollywood Forever. They'd already been paid for. Why don't we just put him in one of those and we'll figure something else out later on? Unfortunately, later on did not work out. June Mathis collapsed and died of a massive heart attack on a New York street 11 months after Valentino died. And so then there were plans for a lavish memorial, but then of course the Great Depression happened. And long story short, Valentino rests for all of eternity in the Cathedral Mausoleum at Hollywood Forever next to June Mathis in what was intended to be a temporary and borrowed crypt. Now, when Valentino died, a young woman started showing up at the cemetery covered head to toe in black with a black veil and a red rose. She became known as the Lady in Black, and she would show up at the cemetery off and on from about 1927 until her last appearance in 1977. And she was very, very dedicated to Valentino. And later, in the early 1950s, she went on a talk show and told her story. She said that when she was a young girl, she'd been very sick in the hospital, and that her mom knew Valentino socially and got him to pay a visit. When he did, he brought the little girl a red rose, and he said, "I know you're going to get better, and I know you're going to outlive me. I just ask that you remember me." And this was her way of always honoring and remembering Valentino. So I thought that was a very beautiful story. And again, she was very, very dedicated for many years. And excuse me, there would be other ladies in black who would appear throughout the years, and each one sort of put their own unique stamp or personality on the role. And then in 2002, when I started giving tours at Hollywood Forever, I decided to be the lady in black. There was really no, I don't know, qualification, if you will. I just decided I'd like to do it. So I started showing up to the annual Valentino Memorial Service every year, and I've been doing that since 2002. The Valentino Memorial Service is the longest running continual event in Hollywood history. It's put on by Alan Ellenberger, Chanel O'Farrell, who works at the cemetery as a funeral director, Stella Grace, and Valentino expert Tracy Terhune. They spend about a year planning this, and it includes music, sometimes tango dancers, museum quality memorabilia displays, different speakers, movie clips. It's really well done. It is a celebration of Valentino's film legacy, of his life, and it's really lovely. And some years I've spoken at it, some years I'm just attend and sit in the audience. But either way, I'm very honored to get to be there and to take part in it. And that happens every year on August 23rd at 12 noon or 12:10 p.m., which is the anniversary of Valentino's death. And again, one of the questions people do ask me is, am I going to get jealous or angry if other ladies in black show up? The answer is no. I think that in our society, women are pitted against each other constantly. And I really, really don't like that. I feel like there's got to be room for everybody. And to me, if other women in black want to show up and they want to celebrate and they want to pay tribute, then I think that's a great thing. I welcome it. I celebrate it. I think it's awesome. So I'm all about inclusion. So to me, the more, the merrier. And one of the things that is interesting about doing the tour for me is getting to interact with the public and see the profound effect that these stars still have on them. For example, about a year or so ago, I was giving a tour, and it was a very large group. And there was a young girl, she was probably early 20s. And as I'm talking about Valentino, I see tears just pouring down her face. And in my mind, I was thinking, what could I have said that upset her so much? Oh my God. And then she turned and just ran right out of the group, ran out of the building. And I noticed she had a guy with her. I assumed he was a boyfriend. I pulled him aside and I said, "Is she okay? Is there something I said?" And he said, "No, she's fine. She gets super emotional when Valentino's name comes up." So I was pretty amazed that, you know, he's been gone over 90 years, and yet young women are still so moved by him and touched by his life and his story. And I think that's really kind of incredible. And of course, there's so much to learn about Valentino. He's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, really. It's endless, basically. I do want to add the Valentino Memorial Service is open to the public. Anybody could show up. Again, August 23rd at 12 noon, or technically 12:10 p.m. at the Cathedral Mausoleum, at Hollywood Forever. So I would like to talk about a few books and ways if you want to learn more about Valentino's life. First off, there are several documentaries about him on YouTube, most notably the episode 6, Swanson and Valentino, of Kevin Brownlow's Hollywood series. Kevin Brownlow is basically my hero and the gold standard of anything relating to Hollywood history. Two other gold standard ladies I would like to mention right now are, first off, Emily Leiter, who wrote the book Dark Lover about Valentino. This is a very thick, full-length biography about Valentino's life. It may be out of print in bookshops, but I bet you could find it in libraries, especially given the pandemic. There's probably so many libraries that have access to great books right now. Dark Lover by Emily Leiter. And next, I want to give a shout out to the great Donna Hill. Donna Hill has also written a wonderful book about Valentino. It's called The Silent Idol. And Donna is an incredible Valentino expert. And this book is chock full of tons of really rare exclusive photos, information about Valentino's life. And by the way, this book is available at Larry Edmunds' bookshop in Hollywood. And that bookshop has been in Hollywood for 83 years now. They are struggling pretty hard in the pandemic. And we're just trying to support them in any way we can because we want them to stay in business. They are such a cornerstone of the Hollywood community. Larry Edmunds supports tour guides, historians, authors, and they've been so great to me, to tons of my colleagues and friends. So The Silent Idol by Donna Hill. So those are two more resources about Valentino. Sorry, it's really hot in my apartment. I don't have air conditioning in like 80% of it. So, okay. Some DVDs I want to talk about too, because while we're in quarantine, I love recommending stuff for people to watch. First off, this just came out recently, Blood and Sand on Blu-ray. This has got all sorts of goodies in here, including audio commentary by Anthony Slide, liner notes by Donna Hill, and it's really, I love this movie. It's really a good Valentino film, also edited by female film director Dorothy Arzner. Next up, there is from Flicker Alley, another friend and colleague that we love to support around here. This is Rediscovering an Icon of Silent Film. This is a 2-disc DVD set, and there are so many extras in this, stuff about the Valentino Memorial, Valentino landmarks. There's just so many good bonus features. I mean, obviously, you can rent it, but if you can get your hands on a copy and buy it, it supports Flicker Alley, helps keep rare films coming out on DVD. And again, it talks about Dietrich Flamme, the very first Lady in Black, my predecessor. So I highly recommend this 2 DVD set. And another one, surprise, surprise, I own a few Valentino movies on DVD. This one is Beyond the Rocks. This movie was a superstar pairing of both Valentino and Gloria Swanson, who became friends during the making of this film. And it was thought to be lost for over 80 years. And then a copy turned up in chopped up versions in different film cans around the Netherlands. So it was kind of an amazing thing that this film was quite literally brought back to life. And we are so darn lucky to have it available to us today. So that's a little bit about Valentino. And again, if you've never seen one of his films, if you've never seen a documentary about him, I recommend doing so. Because I always say on my tours, I can show you the grave and I can tell you stories, but the movies are how they live on. And also, I recommend learning more about June Mathis. I'm going to post some links to this group after this is over. But June was an extraordinary woman in silent era Hollywood. And in addition to writing Valentino's film For Horsemen, she wrote Blood and Sand. She wrote several films for Valentino. And she wrote for Colleen Moore, Buster Keaton, and wrote the 1925 version of Ben-Hur. So she's quite an extraordinary woman in silent era Hollywood. So during this next week of quarantine, I would encourage you to look up some of these great Valentino resources, do a deep dive, learn all about his life, his career, his legacy, and I will see you next week where we will uncover more history behind the headstones at Hollywood Forever.